Very warm welcome to everybody for this session, improving the quality of our homes and communities for an ageing population. The session, as you'll see from the opening slide, is supported by the UKRI, the United Kingdom Research Innovation, and they actually have a heavy hand to play in this afternoon session because two of our contributors are going to be talking about a publication that is upcoming that is being funded by them, and I shan't sort of steal their thunder, but we're delighted for UKRI's support and the team for their ongoing commitment to enabling us to share knowledge and exchange ideas and research. This session is very much around looking at age friendliness from a number of different themes, and we've got a fantastic set of speakers, and they come and join us at a time when obviously we have a general election this week, in fact tomorrow, and it's been relatively silent on age friendliness, but there are things across all the manifestos around improving housing supply, issues around addressing health inequalities, looking at the impact of what our future social care and services might look like. And things that sort of fall out of that will include how we increase, improve and deliver more effective homes and communities that are both inclusively designed but age friendly. And without sort of prejudging what the outcome of that will be, it's also something that I know that as a member of the government's independent government task force that sat on older people's housing, issues around thinking about what the quality of our homes and communities are like were very much central to that. And we look forward to getting a response from an incoming government about how they may take the recommendations that task force made forward. Hopefully more of that either in the first 100 days of an incoming government or soon thereafter. But as I said, we're joined by three fantastic speakers, and we're going to kick off shortly with Natasha Reid. Now, Natasha, you join us as somebody I've long followed and admired your work, and your work that you've done in looking at designing for well-being, and especially through the lens of loneliness more of late, is something that I've been really pleased to watch, to read and to follow, as I say. So the fact that you could join us and share that and give everybody else a taster is really brilliant. We're then going to be joined by Cecilia and Richard, and as I said, UKRI funded a really important piece of work which is due out, and Cecilia and Richard are going to give you a taster to that. I had the privilege to be at a conference about 6 or 7 weeks ago, perhaps a bit further back now, which started to promote this, and we really wanted to do that hot on the heels, and I'm led to believe that it's imminent. So Richard and Cecilia may share a little bit more insight in a minute. But first of all, Natasha, over to you.
Sorry, technical issue. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Great. Hopefully you can all see that. So thank you so much for having me on today's session. It's a real pleasure to join. And I'm going to be talking, as Jeremy said, around loneliness in the built environment as a lens to also think more broadly about how we could move towards something I call more compassionate places. So just as a bit of background to myself and my practice, Matterspace Soul. So it's a new type of specialist design lab that's focused on rethinking our cities and spaces to better serve human and social well-being. So broadly speaking, it's around going beyond the visible physical aspects of places to focus instead on human nature, human needs and human experience. My background has been in architecture and urban design, but about 10 years ago, I started investigating different disciplines that focus on the human impact of places, whether that's psychology or neuroscience or sociology, anthropology, all of those, the ways of seeing place through a slightly different lens. And as Jeremy said, most recently I've created a film, which is something a little bit different, not my usual line of work, but I did that with a very great collaborator of mine, who's a filmmaker and director, Lawrence. And it was looking at loneliness in the built environment to be able to shine a light firstly on the topic of this as an increasing area that has a deep impact on people's mental health, but also physical health, and the fact that our surroundings have the power to actually enable individual and social well-being, and trying to raise awareness of that, because often that's largely overlooked in the way that places are being shaped and designed. And I suppose the other side of that is as well is to raise awareness that there is, from I suppose my perspective, the need to move towards new approaches that can provide different types of solutions to the complex challenges that we have today. As I said, our surroundings can either enable or disable social connection, and emotional isolation has been shown to rank as high a risk factor for mortality as smoking. So it does have very profound effects, and something that, as people shaping the built environment, we can look at addressing more widely potentially. A lot of this work builds on various pieces of research and work that's been going on through initiatives like the Loneliness Lab, which has some really good resources around this. So I was involved in setting out some new guidance around how design can connect us. And then that I've also been involved with the campaign to end loneliness, to be able to share some of that more widely in terms of how you can tackle loneliness through the built environment. So that's been really great to be able to sort of share that more widely. And in terms of how these things have translated into actual design, placemaking and policy guidance or requirements, I'll just share a little bit about what I've been working on alongside making films. So what I've been doing over the last 2 years or so has been developing a model that can redefine how we see the quality of places. So it's called the Place Quality Model, and it's shifting how we assess design quality to be based on quality of life outcomes for people, so the benefits for people and communities. And essentially the objective with this longer term is to be able to shift what is being valued in the built environment. And it looks at 3 different areas around health and well-being, community and belonging, and vibrant and inclusive places. And I'll show you a little bit more about the community and belonging side in relation to interaction. And essentially it's prioritizing people's experiences and the outcomes created through places. And it's been implemented in the first London local authority last year, which is the London Borough of Brent, and starting to implement that now into development schemes directly as well. The ethos behind this, as I mentioned at the start, is about creating compassionate places and seeing the built environment through the lens of human experience, which at the moment to me seems to be missing from the way that we're by and large creating places. I say that in a quite broad brush way because there are lots of very amazing and great projects that do this, but about being able to address all the unseen impacts that places have on us, whether that's the emotional impacts, the social impacts, even the civic aspects of places. And these all have impacts on people's health and quality of life, and sometimes in direct, but also indirect ways. And it's about moving from seeing our environments in a quantitative way around, say, numbers or how something looks, the form of it, but actually seeing it through the qualitative aspects of how people will experience that place and the effect on their lives. And with this, it's essentially about going beyond some of the current standards, but bringing together a lot of different approaches in a multi-dimensional way and in a structured way about how we can look at all the different ways that places can impact us as humans, whether that's starting from mental health and social connectedness through to creating a sense of identity, of ownership, when designing for older people, but also intergenerational spaces. So it's a whole sort of looking at that complexity and how those needs can be addressed through design and placemaking. So to look more deeply into the aspect around loneliness and relationships, there's, just to give context, there's these three different areas. The health and well-being is about more our individual, sort of the way that places impact us individually. The second area, community and belonging, is about the relationships between people. And the third is more societal, about creating vibrant and inclusive places. And this is a quote from the campaign to end loneliness, which says, "What makes social connection develop well or not is often found in the details. The perfect spot for a bench that is nice for a chat, the shared space that is not used because it is dark." So this approach looks at the details of places in the way that they're being designed and how that can embed different types of social interaction. And there's a toolkit that comes with this, essentially to require developments to show how they're addressing loneliness, interaction, community and belonging through the way that the places are being shaped. And there's a series of prompts and questions that start with more baseline practice around how will this place create a sense of identity for the residents, support pride of place, to then asking, is this a sociable place? Does the design encourage people to spend time there? Are there any features that encourage dwelling, such as a reason to stay and pause? And then more leading practice around, is this a place that builds community? Are there factors that support building long-term relationships between residents? Is a sense of belonging supported in the design? And lastly, sort of the highest level of leading practice would be around, does the design go beyond sociability to create social capital, which is about long-term relationships between people, having that sense of trust, or that you can rely on others if in times of need. So there's a sort of range there that can be used to inform developments in different ways. And along with that, there's examples of where this is being done. So it can be as simple as places to sit and pause and just having benches, or having that seated oriented to activity that's happening in views, and creating those opportunities for people to bump into one another, and just create what's called weak ties. But then there's also opportunity to create stronger ties where people bump into each other and see each other more often. So places to sit and talk to neighbours, places within a housing and development that might draw people together. And even more so, building in the capacity within housing or development to have spaces that are dedicated to gathering, to mixing of generations, to things like community gardening, to build those longer term relationships for people to interact and work together. So the objective with this essentially is to have the human benefits of places becoming the foundation of how they're being made. This is still quite new as an approach, and I suppose the goal of having these quality of life outcomes as the new benchmarks of success is that they will be maximised systematically, and it becomes part of the normal process when designing and assessing developments going forwards. And with Brent, what we're doing is having, there's a requirement to actually show how all these indicators have been addressed within the drawings within the planning permission as part of that, a new requirement. And just to finish off, because I think I'm coming to time, this approach is shaped to place-based needs and inequalities. So in Brent, there's particular needs around deprivation or younger people, but the way that developments would be assessed is also in relationship to where there's disadvantage. So areas that have got higher deprivation, there'll be a higher requirement to deliver on quality of life outcomes there. And the next steps is about scaling this more widely. And at the moment, there's a an academic evaluation happening over the next 12 months by a public health research team at Bristol University. So we'll be getting some results in the next 6 months and starting to share that. And to finish up, the longer term aim for this, the idea of creating more compassionate places, is to bring together a lot of the work that many are doing, the research, the projects in this space, to be able to take collective action as an industry and to be able to move from the what to the how we can actually maximize the full potential places to make positive change. So thank you very much. That's it.
Oh, Natasha, a round of applause from me anyway. Thank you very much for opening today's happy hour. I really believe what you're talking about, compassionate places, is a really important step forward, and looking at that in relation to quality of life. And I'm not sure if the work in Brent includes the Quality of Life Foundation's work around developing some of those outcomes as well. But I know there's parallel work, if you're not aware, the link to that. But where I came across compassionate places was very much from an end-of-life palliative care model. And what you're looking at is not necessarily a good death, but a good life at all stages of life as well. So, you know, that is whether it's about compressing loneliness or improving one's mental well-being. Yeah, I think I really enjoyed your presentation. So to thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we'll have some questions and further discussion later on in the session. Without further ado, I'm going to pass them over to Cecilia, who I think is going to be next, who's going to talk about the work from the really interesting project, as I mentioned, funded by the UKRI. And Cecilia, it probably dovetails quite neatly with Natasha's work as well. So let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Can you all see my screen? Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Cecilia Zecca, and I carried out this research, as Jeremy said, together with Richard Griffiths from Cartwright Picard. The main question that we raised at the beginning of this research project was, how can we foster the creation of socially, economically sustainable and more human-centric housing model for later living, both within the home and in the urban environment, so that we could avoid the aging segregations. So what we noticed at the beginning is that the problem that an aging population is facing today in the built environment is mainly related to the inclusive and the accessibility, both physical and cognitive, in the built environment. So if you think there are 168 billion of square meters already built on the earth, and most of them are not fully accessible and inclusive for people at different ages. Moreover, if we look at only the UK, we will see that 95% of the homes do not meet basic access requirements, with consequent costs to the NHS due to domestic accidents and unsuitable houses for recovery. Also, 31% of adults in the UK experienced mental and physical issues directly linked with their housing conditions during the pandemic, and this is just a recent research data. And finally, just to mention a few, there is a low accessibility that costs to the NHS around 513 million. So towards developing an inclusive and innovative housing model for later living, we used an approach which is an ethnographic approach in nature, developed at the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, who was the academic partner, and which included detailed case studies and site visits where we engaged with residents and staff, and particularly we used the so-called cultural probes as a form of engagement with residents. And I will show you in this presentation what we did with these cultural probes. So the literature and case studies were carried out towards identifying best practice in the aging and architecture space. One of the main initial methods that we used was the Delphi technique, which involves a panel of experts in order to identify particular criteria against which case studies or best practices were selected. And this technique assists making informed decisions about complex issues based on the individual expert opinions. So here you can see the initial draft of the 9 criteria that we use to identify best practice globally. And initially we selected 57 case studies and we presented them to this panel of experts during the second round of the Delphi meetings. So this is just a snapshot of the initial categorization of case studies, the 57 ones, from different countries around the globe. So all 57 case studies were also further explored, categorized through this kind of like easy to read template, which includes key informations and the lesson learned from the projects. This is another example in Portugal of later living houses scheme with and particular technology alarm systems. And then finally, also in our archive, we collected also unbuilt case studies. For example, here you can see a proposal in Russia for later living houses together with a public space at the ground floor. Anyway, through other Delphi rounds with the research partners and the UK expert, we redefined the selection criteria, adding also score and important metrics. So in this way, we were able to narrow down the selection from 57 case studies to 13 best practices in the world. And these 13 highest ranking case studies were all visited, and architect, operators, staff, and residents were all interviewed. So the site visit didn't include only the visit of the buildings, but also we carried out a rigorous location analysis of the areas surrounding the building. And as you can see here, we annotated all the findings on maps. For example, in this extract of the site analysis audits, you can see all the characteristics surrounding the building. Also, we went into details to understand through the interviews, the inclusive design approach, the design challenges, and the process from the initial stages of design, but also the financial and tenure mix model, the use of the building and its social values, also the operational and management aspects. So we interviewed many stakeholders who worked on the project. So given the limited time today, I will only present the findings of the extensive engagement that we had with residents, both in the UK and in other countries. And I think that they highlighted the importance of including people, their needs, and the aspirations in the initial design stages. So in tandem with this in-depth interviews, we used, as I said at the beginning, cultural probes, which can be described as a sort of reflective and illustrated activity journals or diary, which help to capture the residents' perceptions, their values and needs, and also provided an opportunity to dig deeper into their experience and their aspirations. So these booklets were used to lead the conversations during the interviews and the visits at their homes, and also to engage with people in reflecting upon their experience of the space, the locations, and the homes itself. So the key area that we explored through these booklets or these exercises we're focusing on my previous homes, current home, local area, typical day, health, happiness, and fears. So despite varying social, financial, and personal situations, the majority of the interviewees, when recalling their previous homes, they positively highlighted the presence of parks, natural spaces, and proximity of essential shops and services. In terms of negative associations, it was generally the noise generated from the surrounding environments, including from younger neighbors. And one of the predominant drivers in the choice of moving to the new later living scheme was this kind of like environmental noise. Isolation and segregation can be caused by the building, particularly by institutionalized buildings. However, the barriers encountered in the surrounding environment play a very important role too. So social isolation is detrimental, as we know, to health. And as you can see from the quotation by this resident, it's really related to the quality of the outdoor space. Through the study, it was also clear that a lack of attention to detail in the design phase contributes to a loss of independence. So for instance, like kitchens with high cupboards and the layout, the poor natural or artificial lighting are all challenges of living independently. So all spaces and openings directly linked to the outdoor, such as verandas, balconies, or the kitchen windows with view to communal areas, encourage and effectively helped to build a sense of community within the building. And residents were often together, even simply for a tea or just chatting, either in the communal space or at home, sharing the spaces with relatives and friends. So people were also asked to score the quality and the importance of their home spaces and less tangible elements, such as the ventilation and the daylight within their homes. So as you can see from this matrix, patterns emerged around the space. And areas that urge improvement at the moment are the extra space for study or socializing, also the quality of the bathroom design, the storage space, and importantly, the daylight. In this final section, residents were also asked to select and write 3 simple words to describe what made them happy about their home and what provoked fear. So the response indicates that the relation between private and social space, so quietness and community, as you can see from this slides, is an important factor, as well as the importance of natural view from their windows. It's very important too. In terms of fears, security concerns were recurring and related to many issues, such as the limited accessibility, in having also limited ability to technology heights, or remaining alone during emergency situations. So all data were analyzed, we collected all the data, and we analyzed and categorized them into thematic areas. We also corroborated, almost at the end of the 2 years research projects, our findings through workshops with older people. And I'm just now going very quickly through these initial considerations that we did after all the research on field. So 3 main thematic areas emerged: relations, diversity, and clarity. These 3 areas were also further elaborated and developed into 3 main design objectives. And all the 3 design objectives focused on adding inclusive approach to all the design phases and not considering only the physical accessibility generally of wheelchair users. So each design objective was then further elaborated with several design principles that will be available in the publications that Jeremy mentioned before. And all the principles aim to provide flexible and adaptable solutions that respond to the diversity of people across parameters such as age and ability. So, as a summary, finally, I think that the main and overarching lesson that we learned from this research project is that architecture is not only about designing a building, but rather is about creating new relations and opportunities for people within the city where the building stands. And I will conclude by quoting Richard Rogers, who wrote in his book, A Place for All People, "Buildings should liberate their user and not limit them." Thank you.
Well, a big thank you to you. I think that's a really great way to follow on from Natasha's earlier presentation. And I think the points that you make there towards the end, you know, about it's just as much about the social architecture as the physical architecture. And the quote from Richard Rogers is really pertinent. But as Sally sort of says for people watching and listening, please do post questions. We've got a couple, I think we got one already, and we look forward to coming to those at the end. And I know that both Natasha and Cecilia stimulated my thinking anyway, and I'm sure Richard is going to do so too. So Richard, I'm going to hand over to you to conclude in terms of the presentations before we have the discussion and questions.
Yep, thank you very much, Jeremy. I'll just share my screen.
A few people, or one or two people, have just asked about whether Cecilia's microphone can be switched on. We hope it's not at her end, but do be patient with us, because I know, Cecilia, you're actually out of the country and joining us from another place. We don't want to disrupt the connectivity. It's been remarkably good so far. So thanks for taking the time out of your afternoon elsewhere. But Richard, you're now live, and over to you.
Yeah. Can I just check you can see the screen? Perfect. Okay, thank you, Jeremy and the HousingLIN for the invitation to speak today. So my name is Richard Griffiths, Senior Architect at Cartwright Pickard. And as Cecilia mentioned, we've been working alongside the Helen Hamlin Centre at the Royal College of Art on a 2-year knowledge transfer partnership, which is a unique collaboration, and the aim is to catalyse innovation across the UK. And we're looking to better the design of later living. So today I'll be looking at 3 of the case studies that Cecilia mentioned. We took a long list of 57 case studies and selected 13 of some of the more learning for best practice, as you can see from the map. Spreading the net across the world, so starting in the UK, Europe, and then further afield. And here's just a snapshot of projects, including Pilgrim Gardens by PRP in the UK, through to Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands across Europe, and then further afield, so Australia, Taiwan, New York, and Switzerland. And as Cecilia mentioned, we were talking to designers, operators, staff, and most importantly, residents. So today I'll be focusing just on 3 of the case studies, and then further case studies will be provided in the publication that will be shared shortly. So starting off with Agavaherne, which is a project in Slagelse in Denmark. The project itself is for over 55s by an interesting developer called Tetris, who are looking to expand this model further in Denmark. The project was recently completed in 2021, and it's a series of 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. It's a successful inclusive design project combining people, identity, and nature. And they really try to create a sense of community around a central shared space. The arrangement of the building is around a central courtyard. And there's modular apartments around an internal double height courtyard space and atrium, which serves as a focal point for communal living. And as Natasha quite eloquently described it, it's a place to draw people together. So within that shared space, there's spaces for people to socialize, work, and relax, and it's quite successful. The choice of materials, including timber and the planting, create a relaxed feeling within the building, and it's very successful. The atrium itself is flooded with natural light, and there's a good variety of spaces for people to socialize. The apartments themselves are accessed from within the atrium, so residents enter the atrium from the outside and then access their apartments from there, with access from a gallery from the first floor. The concept of the building is derived around a hierarchy of privacy. So you can see from this slide here, there's a series of semi-public, semi-private, and private spaces. So you can access apartments from within a semi-private terrace, which is located within the atrium. The apartments themselves consist of 1.5 modules, which are 2 one-bedroom apartments interlinked. They're open plan in layout. There's contemporary finishes and views that look out into the courtyard and then further afield. There's additional larger shared kitchens which are used by residents when guests and residents themselves want to mingle together and cook together, and when guests or family come to visit. And there's a guest suite on site on the ground floor, which is widely used by residents. There's extra storage, which is available to rent also, which is very successful. And building monitoring is widely shared through screens, as you can see on the right. So residents are kept up to date with the energy consumption of the building. The building itself has high sustainability credentials, and the residents can monitor the use of energy, which is quite successful. In terms of innovation, the key thing for this project was consultation before the building was actually conceived. So the developer brought together researchers, anthropologists, and a design agency, Urgent.Design. And they helped shape Agavaherne's 4 key values, which were freedom, lifelong learning, community, and communal space, and the communal space being key. They engaged with potential residents before the brief was established. They created a website and an app, and the app itself is a place for residents to talk to each other as and when they move into the building, and it's very successful. So the key thing here was the early engagement with residents, central shared space for residents to socialize, and having a forward-thinking developer that's looking at pushing the boundaries. The next project, again, staying in Denmark, is in Aarhus. It's harbour houses, and it's a hive of activity that unites old and young. It's in a prominent location in a new harbour master plan within Aarhus. It's an intergenerational housing project. There's a mix of later living, student, and general needs accommodation, all located around a central courtyard. The later living aspect is 100% rental, and there's 83 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, and again, fairly recently completed in 2021. As you can see here, the building itself is located right next to the harbour in a great location. The building heights range from 4 to 12 stories with separate entrances for each of the accommodation blocks. So the later living aspect has its own entrance, which is key to the success of the building. There's a series of, again, social spaces for people to gather together, which are very successful in their intergenerational nature. So they're places for residents to meet, and they're in the form of greenhouses, which are situated on the roofs. So they're bookable shared communal spaces used throughout the year So when discussing with residents and the operator, they're used for Friday drinks, games, activities, relaxing, having dinner, and of course, growing tomatoes. The apartments themselves, so you can see here the views from one of the terraces on the upper levels. The apartments themselves are dual aspects. They've got great natural ventilation, good daylight, and far-reaching views from the balconies, from private balconies. All apartments are fully accessible with open plan living and kitchens. And the kitchens and bathrooms serve as a central core, with the living spaces to one side and the bedrooms to the other, which works quite well. And the residents were very happy in terms of how the layouts worked. So again, as are many projects in Denmark, early engagement was key, particularly with this project being intergenerational, creating a diversity of choices and opportunities for all, early stakeholder engagements, and the importance of, again, shared spaces, albeit on the roof, which are well utilised by residents. And the third and final case study is something slightly different, which is a project we visited out in Australia, in Adelaide. It's U-City by Uniting Communities, which is a housing charity out in Australia. And it's an urban project. It's located within the Central Business District in Adelaide. It's a mixed-use development by architects Woods Bagot. It's close to the city centre, so amenities such as shops, transport, and healthcare are right on the doorstep for residents. And it's a very successful project with the later living apartments. There's 41 in total, located on the top 6 floors. So the concept of this building is a vertical village. So it creates a diversity of choice. There's 4 distinct blocks. You have the ground floor, which is open to the public. So there's a cafe, retail, and community services on the ground and first floor. Above that are offices and commercial space. So Uniting Communities occupy one of the commercial office units. And then there's a local law firm which occupies the next commercial office space. Then above that, there's a respite and disability accommodation, along with a very small hotel offer. And then above that, as I mentioned, there's 41 apartments which are located on the top of the building, with far-reaching views. And you can see here the ground floor cafe and restaurant, which is used by office workers, residents, anybody within the central business district is using this space. It's very successful. As you move up further up the building, as the building sort of separates between uses, there's a series of shared terraces, external terraces, which are combined with internal communal areas. These are very, very successful spaces and a place for residents to spill out and meet in a sort of semi-private place for residents, and far-reaching views again across Adelaide. There's a strong sense of community within the building. So the project itself was used as a test project for a social toolkit, which was part of the post-occupancy evaluation of the building, and that was headed up by Professor Flora Samuel from the UK. And that combined the universities of Adelaide, South Florida, the Australian Institute of Architects, and the housing charity itself, Uniting Communities. And they wanted to measure how a mixed use building impacts users, their behaviour, well-being, and the perception of social spaces, and sort of gauge the importance of social value with architecture and how this can be replicated in other projects across Australia and further afield, particularly the far-reaching nature of the universities that are involved. So finally, it's a great example of aspirational living in the heart of the city centre. The ground and first floor spaces are accessed by the public, which works very, very successfully within Adelaide. And when we were discussing the project with the developer, we asked, is there anything that they would do differently? And they would say that they said that they would build higher. Such was the demand for the later living housing in the city centre that they could fill this building twice over, and they're actually developing a site very close by and looking to replicate this further out across Australia. So just to finish on, as Jeremy mentioned, we will be publishing we have a publication that will be published shortly, which pulls together what Cecilia's discussed and touches on the age-inclusive design principles. The publication will be shared on the HousingLIN website, which follows up from a conference which Jeremy attended back in April. So yeah, thank you very much.
Richard, thank you as well. And I think it was a really great way to conclude by showing some examples. And while you were going through, it reminded me of some of the early work that we did with the Homes and Communities Agency, now Homes England. I know one or two colleagues from them are on the call. The work we did on HAPPI, the Housing Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. And in fact, two of the early schemes that you showed from the English perspective were happy winners. I think the Pilgrim Gardens, and I believe the other one is in Seaford, the Sussex scheme as well.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So there is a question: are there any other English examples? I'll come to that in a minute. But my question really is more from a sort of UK PLC and putting a sort of Innovate UK hat on, and partly because I was on the board of the Healthy Aging Challenge there. Can you see the lessons being learned across globally? You talked about that global arc, and Cecilia, you did too. I think, the Adelaide example, that vertical living, do you see that working in a UK context? I mean, I'm familiar with a couple of schemes which are high rise, but they're probably not at that scale or that ambition. Any thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I think it just takes the right. So that project was conceived by Uniting Communities, which is a housing charity, but you could quite easily see a private developer sort of bringing in various aspects. And I think the mixed use nature of that development helps to sort of de-risk the development. And I think it's just about putting the pieces of jigsaw together, finding the right sites, finding the right products, the right ground floor uses, and then office as well. It could easily be replicated in the UK, maybe on a slightly smaller scale in towns, but definitely in cities. I think that's the direction that we might be heading. It's one solution to the housing shortage that we have, definitely.
Yeah, well, I'm familiar with an alms house charity that's looking at a multi-storey building in Southwark at the moment, aligned to office blocks as well. So
yeah,
that mixed use is starting to come through. In terms of the question that primarily, and welcome to our colleagues from University of Lincolnshire and the School of Architecture there. Are there any other, or what are the UK examples? Can you give us sort of an oversight of those?
Yeah, definitely. So there's the Pegasus Life project in Seaford, which we mentioned. That's a slightly smaller, on a smaller scale. It's quite a unique site. Again, wrapping around a courtyard with a central garden, and really great sort of social. There's a winter garden which looks into the central garden space. We visited a project up in Leeds, which can you remember what project that was, Cecilia? The name of the project?
Is that the co-housing scheme?
No, it wasn't. The name of it's lost. But yeah, there's definitely other projects in the UK. Obviously,
to come out there. Yeah. I think you also had the Pilgrim Gardens in Leicester. That's now 10 years old and very successful. So it shows that there's a sustainability here, both in terms of longevity, but also the use of the building.
I think what was quite interesting when we visited the buildings was the management is key to the success. The building can be designed to be used in a certain way, but I think the people that manage and operate the building are just as important. And especially when we visited Pilgrim Gardens 10 years later, that the management of that site, it proved that was a success on day one, and it was also a success 10 years later. And the HAPPI principles are definitely part of that.
That's really good. And I think from a policy perspective, if we can sort of look at what that means in terms of building for future accessibility, reviewing our building regulations, thinking about our design principles, that age inclusiveness, not necessarily extra care, but thinking about age inclusively both in our mainstream and our broader housing stock is something that I'd like us to sort of explore. There's a question before I come back to Natasha, because there is a question for you. Jenny snuck one in just a minute ago about how do Adelaide residents feel about living so high up? How many lifts are there? What happens to their fire or electricity outage? Really important question. Did you address those things on your visit?
Yeah, we did. I could touch on that. So I think socially it's more acceptable in Australia. I think one of the one of the concepts of the scheme was the shared nature of the ground floor and residents entering through a shared space. So everybody uses the same entrance, but there's also a separate entrance if residents do want a more private access to apartments. It seemed to work. I appreciate that it might not be as successful in the UK, given that the concerns of antisocial behaviour. There was two means of escape, so two escape staircases. I think there was 4 lifts, so it was well provided in terms of means of escape. But most residents used the shared entrance and not the separate private residence entrance.
I don't know whether, Cecilia, you've got any additional information you want to sort of share on vertical living and any sort of things from a research perspective that you've drawn out. Obviously, there's concerns about mobility, about fire access, fire escape, but as well as things like fantastic views that Richard shared and you've shared in terms of sort of people's feeling in touch with their locality and that sort of sense of belonging. Any other things that you can sort of draw out?
Yes, and I think that's the scheme that was developed in Australia, but as well as in other cities like in America or Asia as well. So we noticed that they are becoming more popular, if you want to oversee, because there is a necessity, there is a need, of constructing, vertically, especially in cities that are already built. I'm just thinking in London, especially after the pandemic, there are also many empty offices, or empty buildings that can be converted in mixed use and housing, as a mix tenure. And I think that the aspect of having different uses inside of the building, it's a potentially also an affordable option, because the building sustains itself in a certain way, through commercial and residential and public spaces. So I think that in terms of design, it's important to give balance between these 3 different uses. And as Richard mentioned, in the Australia case study, understanding the circulation, how the circulation can work, can be feasible. From a technical perspective, if there is an emergency such as a fire, so how you distribute, the people flows, but also how you balance the private space and the public space, working space. So these are important considerations to be done at the beginning, at the first
Yeah,
day.
no, thank you. Well, look, Natasha, you've been waiting patiently. One of the first questions we had was really thinking about that sort of connectivity, which I think all three of you have talked on. But she raises the work of a real champion, somebody who spoke at our annual conference a couple of years back, called Cormac Russell, and I've had the privilege of him working in my local patch in Gloucestershire over the years. But he talks about sort of connected communities. And refers to things like bumping spaces. And when you talk about those bumping spaces, the friendly benches and the like, have you looked at that, and what are the learning around that asset-based approach that you think may apply to the design for the built environment from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I had a quick look at that development or developer and this asset-based work, and I think some of the concepts I was picking up from that is that it's about not just the design, but about harnessing some of the skills and strengths of communities as part of the process of creating the place, and empowering people through that. And I suppose there's a sort of need to connect the design of that place with the community who are being given that agency and the power really to be able to shape it to their needs specifically. And it's going a bit beyond design, where we need these different sort of models and ways of working that can enable that. And I think we've got community-led housing and community land trusts and this sort of work, but I think it's still fringe perhaps. And if we can do that widely, that would be brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the work of Cormac can help influence that, Julie, personally. And I think building on what Natasha's just said, his basis around asset-based community development is something I think is very central to the way all three of our guest speakers have talked about co-production in different way, co-design, community-based, co-housing, sort of the strength-based approach. So it was co-production week last week, so we put a lot of emphasis on different aspects of co-production, and I see it very much as part of not just creating the bumping spaces for one-off, but also for longer-term meaningful engagement to support a much more sort of civic engagement, which links into that sort of compassion that Natasha was talking about right at the outset. So thanks very much for your question, Julian. Thanks, Natasha, for asking that. We're fast approaching. God, where does the time go to? We're fast approaching the conclusion of this happy hour, but there are a couple of questions I wanted to just finish on. And Kirsty, great to have you with us. Long time no here. And you talk about issues around antisocial behaviour and looking at some of the real challenges that operational teams and frontline staff have, looking about how to manage out some of antisocial behaviour issues around, I'm sure, things like secure by design. Kirsty then asked a supplementary question, I think, which is links into something else which was already touched on. But if we can just focus a little bit on the antisocial behaviour. Richard and Cecilia, do you have any examples, or did that come through your work, or have you got other work that you're involved in at a local level where this is something that's really irrelevant?
I think all the case studies we visited had something in common in the design approach. I'm referring particularly to the architectural design, and is to have this open and communal spaces, wide communal spaces, avoiding, narrow lanes, long corridors, but also that are generated by just being resulting spaces between two volumes, right? Two buildings, creates narrow lanes or another aspects that was mentioned by many architects were trying to understand what are the point of views of a person passing through that space, through that corridor, or just looking from the window and what is visible, as well as other intangible elements like the artificial lighting. Lighting, these are all aspects that are very important, lighting plays fundamental role in avoiding antisocial behavior, you know, from external people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting you should think about lighting, because I was thinking about that, and also noise and other aspects that impact on the senses. And one of the things that we'll be looking at in a couple of weeks' time is how does green space support that as well? Richard, any other thoughts around that and beyond the lighting, or Natasha?
No, I think just to sort of go back on what Cecilia was saying, I think if the shared spaces are well proportioned, there's good lighting, good overlooking, you can design sort of safe, secure environments without them being closed off just to residents. So it's definitely part of the design process. Appreciate that Secure by Design often want these places to be sort of gated off and, yeah, exactly, put into a box. But I think once you have conversations with the Secure by Design team, and you try and talk to them and describe the design concepts that you have and how you're trying to design out crime, then it can be mitigated.
But I know from Kirsty's experience, it could be anything from sort of abusive language to drugs, alcohol, you name it, across a variety of things. And often these people have different levels of loneliness as well. So Natasha, anything you're finding from your research about antisocial behaviour and perhaps linked to loneliness as well, perhaps possibly?
I think I'd echo the points that Richard and Cecilia made about antisocial spaces, but also the fact that if you create a well-used space that feels owned by people, that discourages sort of these types of behaviours and creates a different sense of space rather than having neglected leftover spaces that sort of feel looked after in a way. So I think there's a sort of sense of how that space feels, as well as some of the sort of aspects such as lighting and so on. So that slightly more intangible side of things, and creating welcoming spaces for all, ideally.
Yeah, get that soul into it, to get the soul, not soulless spaces, but soulful spaces. Look, our final question is it is very much around sort of, can we do more of this, and can we build in sort of change of use around office buildings and the like, you know, the permitted development. It's a big political issue, it's a big issue for us in terms of thinking about housing growth going forward. Has anybody got any comments on that? Should we start with you, Natasha, first?
In terms of sort of making the shift more broadly, I think, well, hopefully after tomorrow, there's going to be lots of opportunities to do things differently, and I think there's greater awareness that we need to address various different crises, and the built environment can do that. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
And I suppose from a carbon perspective, we can reduce our carbon image as well. Perhaps Richard and Cecilia, this is points you're going to make. So let me hand over to you rather than hog you the show.
Yeah, definitely. I think one strand of our research was looking at how you could redevelop the high street, and there's various office and retail buildings within the high street that are vacant or underutilized. Given that there's a certain set of parameters where you don't have too deep a floor plan, or you can bring light into, say, a courtyard, there's definitely an opportunity there to redevelop some of the buildings that are in the heart of our sort of town centres, really, you know, very close to shops, amenities, transport, the sort of places that people want to live. And we see that, you know, later living being one part of that. You know, you could have student housing, general needs housing, all these different housing typologies, all within the high street, and creating a real community. It's a good opportunity, and like you say, hopefully the coming months and years are exciting, and an opportunity for us to do something different.
Cecilia, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to add that, yes, there is a great potential in the reuse of existing buildings, especially changing, you know, the use from office space to houses. But I think, and also it can be very interesting in terms of design as well, apply different concepts, and reuse some spaces. It would be a great opportunity. But I think the housing regulations in this sense need to change quickly. Especially, because there are many limitations that often are related to issues of many years ago, or they are just limiting certain aspects, or at least not enhancing the flexibility and accessibility that is needed today. So I think it's important to remark that also there are some regulations or some legislations that are not 100% clear or too limiting in this sense.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, and I think that's a really important point to end on, because I think what we all have tried to get across today is around designing for inclusion. We don't want to create new communities that exclude or create additional loneliness or more antisocial behaviour, or indeed some of the significant poverty that we still have in this country. We want to really give some hope about how we can design out and build out some better housing solutions. I think the forthcoming publication that you and Richard have been working on will be really an excellent contribution to that debate and give us some real hope and encouragement for taking forward. Natasha, I think your work in looking very much at the loneliness aspect in particular, but branching out around looking at the compassionate space, I really like that, and look forward to working closely with you on that and others going forward. I hope you don't mind, we've overrun by nearly 10 minutes, but I think the benefit of that is we've had the wisdom of our three fantastic speakers. Round of applause to you all. We've had a really great opportunity to delve down into some of the examples that you've shared with us. We still haven't had a chance to talk about MMC and modular and other things that were probably more technical. Perhaps we can do that at another happy hour later this year. But on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank all three of you for presenting this afternoon. Can I thank the team, Sally and the team behind the scenes, for helping to put this on. If you found this of interest, we have 2 more happy hour sessions before the end of this series. Next week, we're going to be looking at dementia-friendly communities, dementia-friendly design, our first of 3 happy hours during the course of this year with the Dementia and Housing Working Group, a group of trade and professional bodies who've come together to really champion and better dementia friendliness in our housing. And our final session will follow on very closely to what we've been discussing and learning today. We look forward to inviting the University of Bath to talk about their work around spatial health and mental health in particular, and designing in the built environment. Some work with Arms Houses about developing resilient communities, and also PNHS architects, who will be sharing some of the examples of work they've been doing in the sector. So I hope you've enjoyed this. As Sally said at the outset, we finished quite abruptly. There is a short questionnaire for you to fill in. Please do so, because it helps us to continue our happy hours and identify subjects and areas we'd like to explore further. So without further ado, thank you very much, everybody, for your wonderful contributions. And we look forward to posting on socials, LinkedIn and other platforms, the session slides and the film of the recording, either tomorrow or soon thereafter. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.